So today, we're going to unpack two massive policy shifts that have been announced in India. One is all about national security, and the other tackles a water treaty that's been in place for decades. We're going to look at how one single violent event seems to have kicked off this huge chain reaction, leading to what's now being called the new normal.
And this is where it all begins. This really stark quote from the source material describes the exact moment that became the catalyst for everything that followed. It refers to an attack where people were apparently singled out and killed simply based on their faith.
So, what was this event? It was the Pahalgam attack. The speech we're drawing from calls it a massacre by cross-border militants. And this wasn't just a shock. It reportedly sparked this deep, widespread anger that rippled across the entire country.
And the reaction? Well, it was pretty much immediate. The country was described as being filled with outrage, and the rest of the world was shocked by just how brutal it was. All of this created this immense pressure, a real demand for a response that was going to be both fast and incredibly decisive.
That decisive response came in the form of Operation Sindoor. Now, what made this so different, according to the announcement, was the kind of mandate the military was given. It was totally unprecedented. The government basically just handed over the keys, giving them complete control over the operation.
And when they say autonomy, they mean total autonomy. The speech calls it free rein. The army got to decide the strategy, pick the target, and choose the exact timing. This was a radical break from how things were usually done, giving the military a level of freedom they apparently hadn't had in decades.
The scale of this operation was, well, historic. With this new mandate, the military reportedly pushed hundreds of kilometers deep into enemy territory. The message here was crystal clear. The old rules of the game were officially over.
So did it work? What were the results? According to the speech, the operation was devastatingly effective. Terrorist headquarters were apparently turned to dust, and their buildings were left in ruins. The level of destruction was so massive that the full scope of it was, and I quote, still emerging.
But here's the thing. This military strike wasn't just about getting even. It was presented as the first step in building something much bigger, a new normal, a whole new security doctrine for the entire country. So what's at the core of this new doctrine? It's basically a complete redefinition of who the enemy is. You see, in the past, a line might have been drawn between the actual militants and the people who support them. Well, that line has been completely erased. Under this new normal, terrorists and anyone who helps them, whether they nurture, fund, or support them, they're all seen as one and the same, an equal threat.
The second part of this new doctrine is a direct challenge to the old way of doing things. The speech flat out declared an end to what it called nuclear blackmail. The message was that these kinds of threats would no longer stop India from responding to aggression. So it's a much more aggressive defense posture.
But just when you think you've got the new normal figured out, it turns out it's not just about military policy. The speech then made a huge pivot to another very old, very contentious issue, water rights. And this was presented as an equally important pillar of this new national direction.
This phrase, blood and water cannot flow together, is incredibly powerful and symbolic. It was used as the core reason for this second major policy change. The argument being made was simple, really. It just doesn't make sense for India's water to be flowing to a nation from which, it's alleged, violence is coming. At the center of all this is the Indus Waters Treaty. It's an agreement that's managed how river water is shared for decades, so challenging it is a really big deal. From the perspective laid out in the speech, this treaty has always been seen as fundamentally unjust and one-sided, helping the neighboring country way more than India.
And how long has this been a sore spot? Well, the speech put a number on it. 7. 7 decades of what it called unimaginable loss for India's own farmers while water from their rivers was irrigating fields across the border.
So this new policy is a total 180. The old way of doing things, as it's described in the speech, was a situation where national interests were being compromised. The new policy says, nope, this unjust treaty isn't acceptable anymore. From now on, India's water is for India's farmers, full stop.
So when you step back and look at these two massive shifts, the new military doctrine and the new water policy, the big takeaway is pretty clear.
This whole speech was basically a declaration of a much more assertive, more unilateral national stance, one that puts national interests and farmer interests ahead of old agreements and protocols.
At the end of the day, these policies are a decisive break from the past. And that leaves us with a really critical question, doesn't it? As this new normal really starts to set in, what's it going to mean for the stability, the strategic balance, and the future of the entire region?